Welcome to Inside Academia, the weekly program where we take a look behind the ivory curtain seeking a frank discussion in American education. I'm your host, Andy Nash. My guest today is George Leef. George Leef is a research director of the John William Pope Center for Higher Education Policy. It's a nonprofit institute dedicated to improving higher education in North Carolina and throughout the nation. George Leef, welcome to Inside Academia.
Well, I'm glad to be on, Andy.
I'd like to talk today a little bit about the Pope Center and what it's been doing with respect to higher education. I'd like to begin first by asking you a report that you had published a while ago called The Overselling of Higher Education. Can you summarize for us what exactly your argument was?
Yeah, that was a piece that we put out in 2006. It had a very, very long gestation period. The first inkling I got that higher ed had been oversold was back in the fall of 1980 when I started my college teaching career and found out that an awful lot of the students I had really had no interest in learning and little ability to learn. And it was at that point that it dawned on me that college wasn't what it had been when I was an undergraduate about 10 years previously. Those thoughts continued to fester in my mind for a long time. Eventually, that teaching career ended. It founded on the rocks of my unwillingness to do grade inflation. And then when I became affiliated with the Pope Center and started looking deeply into what was going on in higher education, all those old thoughts about the students who just wanted to have fun and wouldn't read anything and expected good grades nonetheless came back to the forefront, and I put all those ideas into a paper entitled The Overselling of Higher Education. In a nutshell, my contention was that, and still is, that an awful lot of young Americans are going to college simply because they've been told they need the credential if they're ever going to get a good job and make money. And they were told back in the 80s and still today that, oh, get that college credential and you're sure, almost sure at least, to be on the track to a prosperous career. Well, baloney. We know that that's simply not true. We now know we have an accumulation and ever increasing evidence that many students just coast through college, learning little, having fun, getting their credits, piling up debt. And then they get out in the job world, and the employers find, hey, these kids are no better than if they had just dropped out of high school.
So basically the message is that college is being oversold, but the question is by whom? I guess everybody, guidance counselors, parents, high school teachers,
yeah.
or...
That's right. And one of the sources I came up with in writing the paper was an interesting book published in the mid-'90s by two professors at Penn State entitled Other Ways to Win. And their argument was that a lot of weak high school students are nevertheless pushed by their guidance counselors into enrolling in college. So guidance counselors are part of the problem. A lot of parents are part of the problem. They've heard that going to college is the key, and of course they don't want to have to admit to their friends and relatives that, oh gee, your son or daughter didn't go to college, how horrible, what's wrong with you? And of course there's pressure from politicians who keep telling us that America needs to be number one in the world with respect to the number of college graduates we have. And, of course, the higher ed establishment itself keeps putting out the message that the key to a good life is getting the college degree. So we have all of these sources of information pushing people toward enrolling in college. And for many of them, it's just going to be a big waste of time and money.
It's understandable why parents would want to push their children into getting college. It's status, it's prestige, maybe it's something they never had, and so on. But why the guidance counselors, the people that know better? Are they just worried that the parents are going to say, don't you think my kid's good enough for college? Or what's their motivation?
Well, guidance counselors think they look bad if a relatively small percentage of the students who may counsel go to college. They think it reflects poorly upon them and their school. The safe thing to do is push everyone into college these days.
So this trend has been going on now for years. I guess it's safe to say decades now. You published this paper in 2006. Is there any way you could possibly put a ballpark percentage on the percentage of students that go to college that arguably shouldn't be there, or for whom it ends up being a bad deal economically as well as intellectually, because they don't actually get anything out of what college is supposed to offer them and make them learn?
Ballpark, I'd say about half.
Half?
Half. And at some schools, that half includes the students who really are interested in learning and have the capability to learn. But at a lot of schools, it's a huge percentage of weak and disengaged kids. If they didn't go, a lot of these schools would have virtually no students. They have a real shakeout.
One of the things that we talk about all the time with respect to higher education in terms of the value that you get for your money, and we brought this up with Ann Neal of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, is the level of proficiency that students are graduating with.
Yes.
And I bring this up because I saw there was a YouTube piece in which you were in a forum debate with several other key figures in higher education reform, in which the point had been made. I think the clip was called the lower quality of higher education, and the point in that clip that was made that I thought was very salient was that higher education has no metric for success insofar as teaching, no academic metric as far as teaching undergraduates. In other words, undergraduates will come in, they'll say, all right, you took an SAT, what's your score? Maybe you submitted a writing sample, and for the most part, the admissions department will make the decision to admit the student and enroll the student. Now, after they do that, the student is there. They may take a few remedial courses here and there if necessary, but otherwise, we have very little understanding of what the student does or doesn't know coming in from high school. Mm-hmm. Then after they go through 4 to 5 years of college, there's no exit exam to completely concisely surmise what the student had learned over the course of the 4 to 5 years. All we know is their GPA and their courses that they took and what they majored in, but we don't have any more understanding of what they know after the 4 or 5 years, let alone what they knew coming in. So given the fact that there's no metric of the success of what college meant for that student, then how does the university get to say, well, you need to keep going to college, and what benefit can they show?
That's well, it used to be $64,000 question, now it's $64 trillion question. How can they keep enticing these young people into college when they know, and I think it's true, that a lot of college administrators really know deep down that what they're doing is just processing the kids and taking their money. For example, consider something that is really difficult to quantify, but very important: writing ability. Lots and lots of young people come into college with very poor writing capability. You see discussion about this all the time on the internet, articles published. They coasted through their K-12 years, and no one really pays any attention to their ability to form sentences and use the language properly, because that's hard work and they don't have to do it for the most part. Then they get into college. Now, they might have to take remedial English, remedial writing course. But, of course, they don't want to flunk out students at that point. And so they coast on through those courses. They might learn a little bit, but they're still pretty poor at writing. Then they have to take their college courses. Well, college professors, very, very few of them are willing to do the hard, demanding, thankless task of rigorously grading a student's writing. And so they don't really assign papers much anymore, and if they do assign them, they have the grad student look them over, but they're not rigorously graded for their facility in the use of the English language. So we now have students graduating from college with oodles of credits and technical courses and so forth, but they can't write a paragraph. Now that is a real failing. If there's anything you need to be able to do in almost any line of work, it's to be able to write a decent memo, paragraph, letter, or something. But they haven't even learned that. Something that used to be common amongst sixth graders back when education standards were tough, like back when I was a kid. These days, you have people graduating from not only college, but law school, according to an old friend of mine who just retired from his legal practice. You even find graduates of top law schools who write very poorly. So we spend all this time and all this money, they take all these courses, and what's the end result? They can't even do the most basic things that used to be expected out of kids in grade school.
Well, then the logical question for me in my mind is what happens to the credentialism of it all? I mean, we talk about there being this bubble in higher education, and we typically think of that in the fiscal sense of the term. Mm-hmm. But then what about the credential bubble? In other words, and you've written about credential inflation. Grade inflation leads inevitably to credential inflation. When is the bubble of the credentialism going to pop, or will it pop if, in fact, there's so many people that are getting that same exact degree, but yet they don't know this, that, or the next thing? Yeah,
the two parts of the problem. The students who spend all this time and money in college and still can't do very basic things and next to no skills and knowledge that are of any use in the labor force. And on the other hand, you have lots of students who, by the time they're out of high school, or even while they're still in high school, have far better skills than the students who graduate from college. So how do we find a way for those sharp high school kids, if they don't want to spend 4 or 5 years in college, to signal to prospective employers that they are trainable, that they're worthwhile giving a chance to? As soon as that starts to happen, as soon as we find ways for young people to credibly show that they have capabilities, that's when the bubble really bursts. Because that's when people say, why spend $100,000 or more learning little or nothing that I don't already know? At that point, the bubble will burst, and a lot of these mediocre to lower tier colleges are going to find the students just won't be going there anymore. And also there'll be an emptying out to some extent of the so-called better schools, because the students who used to go there to get the credential will say, look, there are other things I can do at the age of 18 or 19 besides spending my years in college.
Well, right now it sounds like the colleges and universities aren't really distinguishing between the students that came in with a solid level of proficiency and ability out of high school versus the ones that did not.
No, they don't distinguish, and the reason is students bring money with them. They don't care much what their capability level is. As long as they get them enrolled and get that money that they represent flowing in, that's the crucial thing.
We only have a minute or two. I want to talk about the upcoming conference you have scheduled for May 10th, 2011. There's Pope Center's putting on a symposium, I guess, or a conference. If you can discuss a little bit about what that is and what the Pope Center does in seeking higher education reform.
Well, this event is entitled Higher Education Reform, Where the Left and the Right Meet. And it's based on an observation of mine that in the last few years, the critique that we have heard from left progressive types, at least some of them, of higher education, is dovetailing with the kinds of critique we've been hearing for years from right free market types. For instance, if you take a look at the book Higher Education ? By Andrew Hacker and Claudia Dreyfus, it sounds an awful lot like the criticism that the people like Charles Murray and Rich Vedder have been making. It costs too much, there are too many distractions and tangents, and students learn very little, and the administrators are happy with that as long as the money keeps flowing in. So what we're doing on May 10th in Washington is bringing together 3 speakers who are, you might call them conservative free market types, and 3 speakers who are liberal and progressive types, but who, to a considerable extent, share the same disaffection with what's become of our higher education system. So, if anyone wants to go to that, go to the Pope Center website and you'll find out about the event.
Okay, excellent. And I'm amazed to hear about that, because it's I normally don't typically get the sense from the progressive side that they seem to have much of a problem with more and more public money rolling in for teaching faculty and so on. But that's something I'd like to hear the results of, and maybe we can view that up on your website as well if you have video of that. All right, well, thank you. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank George Leef. This has been a great interview, and this has been Inside Academia with Andy Nash. Join us again next week, as every week, as we take you for a look behind the ivory curtain.